Joining me tonight to get into this concerning report from the energy market operator is LNP Senator for Queensland, James McGrath. James, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be here.
Before we get into our discussion on energy, I mentioned to the acting Prime Minister about Tim Fischer's passing, losing his battle with cancer. The Prime Minister described him as a big Australian. He was a genuine but very quirky character, wasn't he, James?
Oh, totally. We need more quirky people in politics, and Tim's passing shows that. Too many politicians nowadays are a bunch of oxygen thieves in suits wandering around the place, looking for a real job sometimes. Tim was a genuine character. We need more people like that. But what we're forgetting with Tim's passing is that his kids have lost a dad. And Judy's lost a husband. So, he was a family man, but he was someone who just got out there and he was himself. Bill O'Chee on radio this afternoon said that he wasn't a complex person, but he was complicated sometimes in terms of how he approached life. And he was someone who could bore for Australia, but not in a boring way, bore for Australia in terms of trains. We need more people in politics who can push those big issues. Tim will be missed. And what is fascinating is that no one can find anywhere where he said a bad thing about anyone.
No.
Isn't that refreshing to have a politician who doesn't say bad things about another politician?
Isn't it amazing? That's well pointed out. This blackout warning today from the regulator, it's worse than we ever thought. 2 million households in New South Wales and Victoria forecast to be in darkness during events during the night, in extreme heat, and obviously during the cold. This is Energy Minister Angus Taylor today.
We stand ready, as I said, to work with all state governments to ensure we have affordable, reliable power. But at the end of the day, those state governments have to do the right thing. The truth of the matter is the Victorian government is determined to add 5,000 megawatts, an unprecedented amount of solar and wind into its system, as we've seen in South Australia, without a plan for reliability and affordability. And Victorians are going to pay the price this summer.
And yet the Greenies, James, are ready to protest over the opening of a new, modern, coal-fired power station. You can't have it both ways.
No, you can't have it both ways. But the thing about the Greenies, remember, is they're a bunch of hypocrites. These are the same people who jumped in their cars and drove up through Queensland, up to central Queensland, to tell Queenslanders that we couldn't have a coal mine up in central Queensland. But in cars powered by petrol, made out of steel, which coal was an important part of. The Greenies will be the first ones to complain when the air conditioning collapses and the fans stop working over the summer. We've got to have coal-powered fire stations in Australia. It is crazy. It's great that we're exporting coal. I'm a big fan of us exporting coal. We've got some of the world's cleanest coal here, but isn't it strange that we're not able to use that coal to put into our new possible coal-powered fire stations? I mean, where do these Greenies think that the power is going to come from? The magical power tree down at the bottom of the garden with the magical money tree and the magical magic tree?
Yeah.
I mean, these people are the pits. They are destroying our economy and they need to be called to account.
You're quite right. At the end of the day, they are calling on, more renewables, but they don't know the science with renewables. Maybe one day it'll be fabulous. We'll be able to not rely on coal. We won't emit carbon dioxide, but we are decades and decades away from that, and they need to understand that. You are a very strong advocate for nuclear energy. Do you think the Prime Minister's listening to that argument?
Well, what the Prime Minister and Angus have done, and I thank them for this, is that they've asked one of the committees in the House of Representatives to have an inquiry into nuclear energy. Keith Pitt, the member for Hinkler, and myself have been pushing this issue for some months now. We want to have a conversation about nuclear energy. It is crazy in Australia that we've got a third of the world's uranium. We are geologically stable, and yet we can't talk about nuclear. We've got the Labor Party running a disgraceful scare campaign, going around painting anyone who wants to talk about nuclear as being the twin evil brother of Mr Burns off The Simpsons with a pet three-eyed fish, when In fact, nuclear could be a really important part of our energy mix. And what we're saying about nuclear is, let's have the conversation. Let's see whether it can be economically viable for Australia. I think it can be. There's going to be a parliamentary inquiry. It's going to be chaired by Ted O'Brien, who's the member for Fairfax, which is on the Sunshine Coast. And I would encourage people to put submissions into it, and let's test the evidence.
Yep.
And if it shows that it can be viable, then let's start planning for the future. Yeah. What we're seeing happening today in Australia is people haven't been planning for the future. And it's mainly Labor, because Labor are very good at talking and not very good at walking about these issues.
Look, can I just suggest and direct people who are watching this to modular nuclear power plants and what role they're playing in the UK. Go and Google that tonight. If you're a little bit short on knowledge in reference to the modern technology related to nuclear and what the UK is doing, you've got to know that the United Kingdom is embracing modular, smaller little nuclear plants to run districts where manufacturing is occurring and industry occurs. And that's exactly what we can do. It would suit Australia more because we have more isolated areas where industry operates. But anyway, I direct you towards that. Now, can I just ask you about this Great Barrier Reef Foundation? I question what former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was up to when he handed over that $443 million out of the blue without tender last year to the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. We hear today that they've just spent $3.6 million on admin activities, whatever that might mean. I don't trust this mob. James, what about you?
Oh, look, I feel a bit sorry for them. I think that they're trying to do the right thing. They were being criticised for not having enough staff, and now they're getting criticised for having more staff. I understand that, being a Queensland, I want to make sure the reef is looked after, and I understand they've got a lot of projects that are going to come online soon. But I think the big issue about the reef is not the foundation. The big issue are the Greenies, who are going around the world selling down Australia and selling down the reef. I've got friends in London who contact me and go, "Oh, is the reef dead?" And I go, "No, of course it's not dead," because the Greenies are selling down Australia. And I think that is the big issue here. And I want to get onto the Bradfield at the scheme at some point, because one of the issues that pushes and does damage to the reef is the water runoff up in far north Queensland. You get metres of rain up there, and that causes damage to the reef. And the best way to stop damage to the reef is actually build the dams and stop the water rushing out to the reef. But the Greenies don't want that, do they? They don't want the dams.
There's a speckled green frog that they don't want to interrupt, you see? It's always the speckled green frog. Yeah. Can I just hurry on to one last subject, because I do want some comment from you on this. It's been a crazy week so far in Queensland, in your neck of the woods. The Queensland State Parliament has been dominated by repeated attacks on the Premier, who's harbouring her Chief of Staff and harbouring her Deputy Premier, despite the investigations that are going on. Let's hear what Deb Frecklington, the opposition leader, had to say this afternoon.
I mean, this is a Deputy Premier that is in trouble. The Premier is in trouble. The Premier needs to actually show some leadership, use a backbone and stand aside the Deputy Premier. I mean, this is for the best interests of the people of Queensland. I keep saying this, I'm out and about all the time, Peter, listening to people, and this is what people are talking about. Jackie Trad is making a laughing stock of the Queensland government.
James, Anastasia Palaszczuk seems to be on a self-destruct mission.
Oh, well, Palaszczuk's got no power. Palaszczuk's just a figurehead. The real power in this government is held by her Chief of Staff, Mr Barbagallo, and he's in trouble. He should be put aside or resign. And also the Deputy Premier, who is the real Premier. Trad's not going to step aside because she's in control. She should step aside in terms of, she should resign fully in terms of the issues that have been thrown around. But Palaszczuk is just weak. She is a weak Premier, and it's showing up in terms of what's happening with our state. Because she's so weak, the state is grinding to a halt.
LNP Senator for Queensland James McGrath, always good to have you on. Thank you for your time.